Most people in the city knew him as the man beneath the railway bridge. They called him Marcus. Nobody knew his last name. Nobody knew where he came from, and almost nobody cared. Every morning, Marcus woke beneath the same concrete bridge, wrapped in an old brown coat that had once belonged to someone else. He would sit quietly beside the sidewalk while thousands of people passed him. Businessmen hurried toward expensive offices. Mothers pulled their children closer. Tourists took photographs of the city, and Marcus watched all of them pass. Sometimes, people dropped coins into the paper cup beside him. Sometimes they dropped nothing. But Marcus never begged. He never chased people. He never shouted for attention. He simply sat there, quietly, like a man who had already learned that the world could continue moving even after it had completely forgotten you. But there was one thing most people didn't know. Marcus had once spent his life running toward danger. For 24 years, he had worked as an emergency responder. He had pulled people from burning buildings. He had performed CPR on strangers. He had held the hands of dying people while waiting for ambulances to arrive. He had saved lives. But then one night, Marcus had been unable to save the two people who mattered most: his wife, Sarah, and his son, Ethan. After that night, the man who had spent his entire life saving others slowly disappeared. His career ended. His marriage was already gone. His home was sold. And eventually, Marcus found himself sleeping beneath a bridge. But on one cold Tuesday morning, something happened that would change his life forever. Marcus noticed a little girl standing alone beside a busy road, and he noticed the vehicle coming straight toward her. Her name was Ava Carter. She was 7 years old, and that morning, she had been waiting for her school bus. Ava was the only child of Daniel Carter, and Daniel Carter was one of the richest men in the country. He owned technology companies, luxury hotels, private jets, and a financial empire worth billions of dollars. But money had never made him less afraid of losing his daughter. Ava was the center of his entire world. That morning, her school bus stopped across the street. Ava looked up. Then she saw a black SUV. She thought it was her father's car. "Daddy!" She ran toward the road. But it wasn't Daniel's vehicle. The driver saw her. He slammed on the brakes. The tires screamed against the pavement. Ava froze. She stood directly in the path of the vehicle. People screamed. A woman dropped her coffee. A man shouted for someone to call 911. But nobody moved. Nobody except Marcus. He had been sitting beneath the bridge. But the moment he saw Ava, something inside him changed. The world disappeared. The traffic disappeared. The noise disappeared. All Marcus saw was a little girl standing in danger. And for one brief second, he saw Ethan, his son, the little boy he had once held in his arms. Marcus stood up. Then he ran. The vehicle was only seconds away. Marcus ran faster than anyone thought a man his age could run. His old boots hit the pavement. His coat flew open. Ava turned toward him. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why a homeless man was running toward her. She only knew that everyone was screaming. Then Marcus reached her. He grabbed her around the waist and pulled her backward. The SUV crashed into the metal barrier. His face was completely pale. Ava, the little girl, ran toward him. Daniel dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. He held her so tightly that she could barely breathe. For a moment, the billionaire didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a terrified father. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Marcus. The homeless man stood several feet away. His coat was torn. His hands were bleeding slightly from the pavement. Daniel walked toward him. "Thank you," he said. Marcus nodded. "She's okay." Daniel reached for his wallet. He pulled out several $100 bills. Marcus looked at the money. Then he looked back at Daniel. "I don't want it." Daniel froze. "I just want to thank you. You can thank me by making sure she gets home safely." Marcus turned to walk away, but Daniel suddenly stared at his face. The beard, the eyes, the scar above his eyebrow. His expression changed. "Marcus!" The homeless man stopped. Marcus didn't turn around. Daniel stared at him. "Marcus Reed." Slowly, Marcus turned. Daniel took a step closer. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Do I know you?" Daniel's voice became quiet. "You saved my life." Marcus said nothing. Daniel remembered. 20 years earlier, He had been a completely different man. He had been 25 years old. He had no money, no family, no future. He had lost his job. His girlfriend had left him. His mother had died. And one night, Daniel had walked to a bridge. He had stood there for almost an hour. Then Marcus had found him. At that time, Marcus had been working an overnight emergency shift. He had noticed the young man standing alone. Most people would have called the police. Marcus didn't. He simply stood beside Daniel. For almost 3 hours. He didn't lecture him. He didn't tell him that everything would magically be fine. He just listened. Finally, Daniel had said, "I have nothing left." Marcus had looked at him. Then he had reached into his pocket. He had taken out the last $80 he had and handed it to Daniel. Daniel had stared at the money. "What is this?" "Enough for a meal," Marcus had said. "I don't need food." "Yes, you do." Daniel had started crying. And Marcus had said something he never forgot. "You don't have to fix your entire life tonight. Just survive tonight." That sentence had saved Daniel. The next morning, Daniel found a temporary job. Then another. He started a small business. That business became a company. That company became an empire. 20 years later, Daniel Carter was worth billions. But he had never forgotten the man who had saved him. He had searched for Marcus for years, but he never found him. Until that morning, Daniel stared at him. "Where have you been?" Marcus looked away. "Here and there. You disappeared." "So did you?" Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" Marcus smiled sadly. "You became someone important." Then he looked at his own coat. "I became someone people stopped seeing." Daniel wanted answers. He invited Marcus to a nearby restaurant. Marcus refused. Daniel offered him a hotel room. Marcus refused again. Finally, Daniel asked, "Then what can I do?" Marcus looked at him. "Nothing." Daniel didn't understand. Marcus had saved his life. Now Daniel had found him again. But Marcus didn't want money. He didn't want a house. He didn't want a job. He didn't want pity. Daniel eventually learned why. Marcus had once had everything. A beautiful home, a loving wife, a son named Ethan. Ethan had been 8 years old when Marcus lost him. One rainy evening, Marcus had been working an emergency shift. Sarah and Ethan had been driving home. The road was wet. A truck lost control. The accident happened in seconds. When Marcus received the emergency call, he had no idea who was inside the vehicle. He arrived at the scene, and then he saw the car. He saw Sarah. He saw Ethan. And for the first time in his life, Marcus couldn't save the people he loved. He had been trained to remain calm, to control his emotions, to focus on the emergency. But that night, he was no longer an emergency responder. He was simply a husband and a father. After that night, Marcus never truly recovered. He left his job. He stopped answering calls. He stopped visiting friends. He stopped paying bills. And slowly, everything disappeared. His house, his savings, his future. Eventually, Marcus stopped believing he deserved one. Daniel listened to the story in silence. Then he asked, "Why didn't you ever contact me?" Marcus looked at him. "Because I saved your life." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "I didn't save you so you could spend the next 20 years paying me back." Daniel looked down. Marcus continued, "You had a life to build, and you did." Ava had been listening from the other side of the room. She had become attached to Marcus almost immediately. She asked him questions. Where did he sleep? Where did he eat? Why did he have a scar? Why did he always look sad? Marcus answered some of the questions. He ignored others. But Ava didn't stop asking. One afternoon, she found him sitting alone in the garden outside Daniel's house. Daniel had finally convinced Marcus to stay temporarily in one of his guest houses. Not as charity. Daniel had offered him a job managing a new community project. Marcus had agreed only because the job would involve helping others. Ava sat beside him. "Are you sad?" Marcus looked at her. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I miss people." "Who?" Marcus looked at the sky. "My family." Ava was quiet. Then she asked, "Do you think they miss you too?" Marcus didn't answer. Ava leaned against his arm. "My mommy died when I was little." Marcus looked at her. Daniel had never spoken much about Ava's mother. Ava continued, "Sometimes Daddy thinks I don't know he's sad." Marcus's expression changed. "Your father loves you." "I know." "Then you should tell him." "Tell him what?" "That you know." That evening, Ava walked into her father's office. Daniel was working late. She climbed into his lap. Then she said, "I know you miss Mommy." Daniel stopped working. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he hugged his daughter and cried. From the hallway, Marcus watched them, and for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. Not happiness, not yet, but something close to it. Belonging. Daniel wanted to give Marcus everything. A house, a bank account, a car, a new life. But Marcus refused. He told Daniel, "You can't buy back the years I lost." Daniel knew he was right, so he stopped trying to give Marcus money. Instead, he asked him a question. If you could change one thing about this city, what would it be? Marcus answered immediately. People shouldn't have to sleep outside. Daniel asked, "Why?" Marcus looked at him. Because people don't become worthless just because they lose their home. That conversation changed everything. Within months, Daniel purchased an abandoned building in the city. He renovated it, added sleeping rooms, a kitchen, a medical clinic, a counseling center, and a place where people could receive help finding work. But Daniel didn't put his name on the building. He didn't call it the Carter Foundation. He didn't name it after himself. Instead, he asked Marcus what the center should be called. Marcus thought for a long time. Then he said, "Remember." Daniel asked, "Remember what?" "Remember that every person who walks through those doors was once important to someone." So the building was named the Remember Center. On opening day, hundreds of people gathered outside. Formerly homeless men and women, volunteers, doctors, workers, families. And at the center of it all stood Marcus. He was wearing a clean dark coat, but he still looked uncomfortable in expensive clothing. Daniel stood beside him. Ava stood between them. A reporter approached Daniel. "Mr. Carter, why did you spend millions of dollars on this project?" Daniel looked at Marcus. Then he answered, "Because 20 years ago, someone spent $80 on me." The reporter asked, "Who?" Daniel turned toward Marcus. The cameras followed his gaze. Marcus immediately looked uncomfortable. Daniel continued, "When I had nothing, this man gave me his last money. He stayed with me when everyone else had walked away, and he saved my life." The crowd became silent. Daniel looked at Marcus. "Today, I am not returning a favor. I am simply continuing one." Marcus looked down. His eyes filled with tears. Ava reached for his hand, and Marcus held it. 3 months later, Marcus was no longer sleeping beneath the railway bridge. But the biggest change wasn't the apartment Daniel had arranged for him. It wasn't the new clothes. It wasn't the bank account. It wasn't even the job. The biggest change was that Marcus had started speaking about his family again. He kept a photograph of Sarah and Ethan on his desk. For years, he had hidden the photograph inside an old bag. Now, he kept it where he could see it every morning. One evening, Ava visited him. She looked around the apartment. "Do you like it?" Marcus smiled. "Yes." "Are you happy?" Marcus thought about the question. Then he answered honestly, "I think I'm learning how to be." Ava smiled. Then she hugged him, and Marcus closed his eyes. For 20 years, he had believed that losing his family meant he had lost the right to belong anywhere. But that day on the street, a little girl had reached for his hand, and somehow, she had helped him find his way back. Sometimes, the person everyone ignores is carrying a story nobody has ever asked to hear. Sometimes, the man who appears to need saving has already saved someone else. And sometimes, life brings two strangers back together, not because one of them owes the other a debt, but because both of them still have something left to give. Marcus Reed had once saved Daniel Carter's life. 20 years later, he saved Daniel's daughter. But in the end, it was Daniel who helped Marcus discover that his life was not over. He had simply been waiting for someone to see him again. And sometimes, all a broken person needs is one person willing to remember that they were never worthless in the first place.